Splunk legal team requires that we share the following. As you might expect, we'll be making forward-looking statements about our business and financial performance during the course of this presentation. Those statements are subject to risks and uncertainties that are described in our filings with the SEC. Please welcome our Splunk moderator for Advancing AI for the Public Sector, Paul Kurz.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Paul Kurtz. I'm super happy to be here today. I've got an awesome set of panelists here, and I'm going to have each one of them introduce themselves, give a little bit more background. Just real quick on me, I'm Chief Cybersecurity Advisor at Splunk. I also serve in the role as Field CTO. I came to Splunk about three and a half years ago. I started a company called TrueStar, which is an intelligence management platform which was acquired by Splunk. And I've been here since and loving every minute of it, and especially the new relationship with Cisco. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark. Mark, do you want to give a little bit of background on yourself, and we'll go right down the line and then get on with questions.
Sure, thank you. My name is Mark Cantor. I am the Chief Information Security Officer of GAO, Government Accountability Office. In that role, of course, I manage the endless amounts of cybersecurity risk and understanding of security vulnerabilities, exploits, all of that fun stuff that we're here to talk about today. Before that, I spent about 20 years doing audits of federal government agencies across the board, both in the civilian and DoD side of things.
Excellent. Thanks, Paul. I'm Jay Etchings. I've been at Splunk for about 7 years. I'm part of the Global Architects Group for AI. Prior to that, I was a researcher and research faculty at Arizona State University, as well as a rotator with the National Science Foundation.
Thanks, Jay. Peter Springer. I'm a field CTO at Splunk, focusing on cybersecurity and transformation. I was previously at Citigroup, the bank, doing large-scale cybersecurity operations transformation there. Previously at JP Morgan on the business side, and before that I was a military officer. I spent over 10 years in the Army infantry with a couple tours in Iraq and Afghanistan each.
Great. Thank you, everybody. So if I could, I know it's a little hard for us to see you out there, but I wanted to try to do a quick hand-raising exercise. And the first question I have is, how many, because obviously our topic today is AI adoption within the public sector space, how many of you are involved in any way, shape, or form in AI adoption now? So quite a few hands. Okay. All right. And any specifics of like those of you who've put up their hands involved in like actually implementing AI today? Is there anybody out there? Far fewer hands. Okay. All right. I see one or two. Okay. All right. Good. So with that, I wanted to wade into the first set of questions here. And Mark, we'll start with you, given you're our federal representative here. When you think about what are the cornerstones, the primary drivers of that has been put in place by the federal government, what are those cornerstones? What are those principal documents, if you will, that are setting us up for AI?
Sure. So let me begin by probably a lot of, certainly the people that have raised their hands, Executive Order 14110, discussing really the AI and developing those use cases throughout the environment. But let me also extend to one other question. Or one other comment in that area is the GAO looks at a lot of these programs throughout the federal government. We really want to understand not only the use cases, but a lot of these working groups, whether it be under the JFMIP umbrella, which is Joint Financial Management Improvement Program. We looked at developing use cases for AI as far as improper payments, really extending that into what other models can we use it throughout the federal government, as well as our own internal purposes. So JFMIP, for those that are not familiar with it, is also a combination or a consortium between GAO, OMB, OPM, and Treasury, where we develop these kind of cutting-edge, emerging technology use cases throughout the federal government, really bordering in on this or bringing in AI models of how we can use machine learning, AI to really reduce those improper payments throughout the federal government. So GAO has done about 6 reports in fiscal year 2024 so far on various use cases, whether it be through DoD, climate modeling, and various other things where we can think about and strategize. Does this make sense for the vast amounts of data that are in the federal government? What we can use, what makes sense, where can we build upon some strategies in AI, extending that into the various things that were more traditional of a sense of, okay, great database queries and whatnot to get information out.
Great, thank you. If I can jump over to Peter real quickly, given your most recent experience in the private sector, and you talk about, we talk about cornerstone documents in the federal space. Is there anything that stands out in the private sector space of like documentation or initiatives? It could be even initiatives within a particular industry where you're starting to roadmap what AI pursuits you might be making, say, for example, in banking and finance.
Sure. I think there's absolutely a mandate to implement. I think we all feel that. When I talk to CISOs, many of them have in their goals to implement X, Y, or Z AI initiatives. It still feels like we're figuring out what something is to do with AI, and I think that's a tough challenge. And so thinking about that, really delving into a clear view of use cases and what does AI do and what should AI not be doing. Things where, maybe we want a person doing it first or, reviewing it, and we want them in the loop. That's maybe not a good AI use case for that first go about. So I think prioritizing quick wins is something we're seeing. Looking at it where there's the use cases where we can understand what's going on, we can replicate those results, and we have the data available. And that's why I think a good data foundation is so critical to what we're doing for AI. It really is the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. And so looking at having that structured data in place, a platform that has all of that ready to go, makes the AI use cases they flow much more easily, so the key stakeholders can understand what needs to go in that roadmap and buy into it to enable the program to gain momentum.
Yeah. And Jay, for your part, you spend a lot of time on AI, looking at models and the like. And from your perspective, and after listening to Mark and Peter, what are the basic pieces of foundation from your perspective that come to mind for you?
Well, I think the first piece that's important to look at is when we discuss AI, we should still look at it in the context of Splunk. From use case development is important. So many times we see customers come to us, they say, hey, we want to deploy a technology. This should be looked at no different than some of the other emergent technical innovations that have come on in the past, say, 20 years. Well, there were folks that wanted to do big data. There were initiatives to move to the cloud, but without any direction. And so I like how you had mentioned, Mark, that you had a specific plan, a methodology where you would start small, build a reproducible use case, and then validate with that. And I think before we jump in and boil the ocean and tackle some of the biggest projects we have, it makes sense to start small, get some small wins and successes, but define them in the terms of use cases, not in let's just do AI. So.
One thing I'd just like to, for the program is garbage in, garbage out. If we're not working with good data to begin with, the models are not going to work. It's just that simple. So we really need to ensure that whatever we're building our models around, we're working with clean data, we know it's good data, there's no problems with it, and it's reliable.
Yeah, because 70% of the effort in many of the AI or data science projects is exploratory data analysis, right? So you define a use case, you have to figure out where the data is, do you have access to the data, is the data in Splunk, do I have the appropriate fields extracted before you can go forward and build that experiment? And just as you've said, if you haven't addressed those parameters, your project's probably going to fail.
You guys are immediately starting to talk about, if you will, those operational hurdles that are out there to begin to implement AI. I mean, Peter, is there anything else that kind of jumps out from your perspective as far as operational hurdles that you've seen in the private sector?
Yeah, I think looking at just any large-scale organization, the banks stand out just with the sheer size of the computing estate, and in the public sector, many of the same challenges, just given the scale. But I think the question from oversight teams, from it could be auditors or risk management teams about what are you doing, you're gonna what, and so having clear answers for that, or at least a framework to be able to answer those questions, and looking at governance and committees is something that is necessary, but could also be a double-edged sword. And so having the subject matter experts in place to be able to say, this is a static AI versus a dynamic AI model, or this is something that we have control over or something we don't. And what I've seen is that in some cases, people are doing the right thing and building an AI ML committee to look at these things. But if anything has a whiff of AI in it, it can actually stop other projects where it's not an AI or ML model that can be controlled by your organization. And so getting a really clear process to review and approve things, and then a frank discussion to keep them moving, I think that's imperative before bringing in different models, just to make sure that everyone's on board and you have agreement across stakeholders.
Yeah, because at one point we were saying we should always design and deploy systems with security in mind. I think as we look at AI systems, we should design and deploy with governance in mind. So if you're going to start an AI project, probably start with a governance board or an oversight board to determine what success looks like and how that objective will align with governance models.
Yeah, my thought was going to be, do we have all the right stakeholders at the table? First and foremost, what is our problem? What are we trying to solve? Do we have a complete and accurate understanding of whatever the program is that we're trying to work with, so that we have various key stakeholders that are going to be able to discuss, report, that collaborative effort as we move forward. Those are going to be really keys to the success of whatever the project is. And to a lot of point, when we think about whether it be security first, the business first, whether it be a single pane of glass, when we're looking at those various concepts, are we bringing all the various key players involved to accurately discuss, and then ultimately the success of the project really depends on that.
I think that the point about stakeholders is very, very important. And, I know, like, for example, I believe it's the initial executive order or it says every agency needs to appoint a leader for AI affairs. Mark, can you expand who the type of stakeholders that, should be around the table? Maybe they aren't all around the table yet, but for you, as you begin to go down this road, who are those stakeholders that do you think need to be there? And likewise, if others have thoughts as well.
Yeah, sure.
Not to throw you into the bus right away, but
the generic thought. So certainly, I mean, not to take cybersecurity out of the picture. Cybersecurity is always front and center, because without controlling who has access to the information, then we've got big problems. But then you have your chief data officer, your chief AI officer, CIO. Depends then further down the project. Is this a financial project? Is this a business project? Who are the relevant people that from the business side that apply? But there's various key people that need to be involved with that. When you think about, I mean, certainly the governance board, right? Do we have an accurate understanding of how not only this this AI project, but how does it affect the larger integration into the overall entity-wide functions? Is this going to be utilized in a sole environment, or are we now looking to augment other applications or programs that would then be reliable of data on down the line, where all these key decision makers really need to have an accurate understanding of how the data is coming in so that they can really formulate an opinion once they decide, okay, it's reliable.
Yeah. Yeah. Any additional thoughts, Jay, Peter?
You know, without digging into product features or components at too much of a lower level, one of the nice things about some of the tools within our machine learning toolkit are very collaborative. And what I mean is we have an experiment-built framework that you can go through and you can actually create a model. So my background is in bioinformatics, so I don't really know to the depth of cybersecurity as Mark does, or Peter for that matter. However, I know statistics and I know how a lot of these models work. And within our experiment framework, you can go in and you can build a model, you can validate it, but then I can actually pass it off in a collaborative environment to the rest of my peers to comment on it and kind of peer review it. So that's a nice piece. And I think it's good to mention in the context of these talks, when we talk about Splunk as a product, we've had these tools since 2015, right? So many of the other folks that are in this space are trying to redefine themselves as AI companies now. Everybody's trying to adopt just like you are. However, we've used that same time to go forward and innovate with these products and kind of put AI and ML within our platform end to end, but still give you these collaborative toolkits where you can build use cases, validate them, have them fail, iterate, fail fast and iterate. So I think those are important pieces about having stakeholders involved.
Yeah. Peter, anything? Or?
Yeah, I think just stakeholder engagement, just like we've been saying, is paramount, but especially the users that are excited about it, where it helps them get their jobs done. And I think, in today's economic climate, there's a lot of focus on cost. There's a lot of things that people are trying to figure out to be more efficient. And it's a lot to keep up with. And so positioning AI as something to help people do their jobs, as a tool that, we have so much more data to deal with now. And so I think getting those stakeholders on board as champions to be able to get those quick wins secured and keep the program moving forward without it getting mired into, maybe other organizational things. But I think AI is often a separate issue about how do we explore these capabilities where we don't even know what it's capable of yet. And how do we do that in a responsible way with measured steps and a roadmap and a program with discipline?
I'm going to walk back just a little bit because I think we might be leaving something out. And, we've talked about stakeholders, we've talked a bit about models, but if we were to talk about the infrastructure, in particular, when we think about the private sector space or the federal space, does the infrastructure exist? Or I don't know, Mark, if you can expand a little bit on, how is, whether it's GAO or more broadly speaking, the federal space, how are they looking at building out the infrastructure to support the adoption of AI?
Sure. So I think when we look at this, and I won't speak more, I'll speak generically on this. Certainly there's been key developments such as the migration to FedRAMP, so we have that scalability. That scalability is really key. I think one of the challenges that I think any sort of AI adoption is that we're up against is not only do we have the FedRAMP environment, but I think a lot of us know that there's certain products that are in the commercial side that are not in the FedRAMP authorized packages that we need to understand. And if we're looking to utilize those products, how do we get them into the FedRAMP environment so that we can meet the protections in those overall packages? But I think that when we look at it from a cloud computing environment, the real key is going to be the scalability of being able to spin up various servers, whatever the processing and power that we need to build upon is. That ultimately is the key. Are we positioned in the right environments so that we can build upon this if and when we believe it's a good product, for whatever the application may be?
Yeah, certainly, because doing AI at scale, you realize really quickly the reason why 80 to 90% of these projects fail is the inability to operationalize these. So it makes sense to do this in the cloud native format where You can deploy nodes, you can build models, you can have them fail, and you can redeploy them. Plus, it allows you an element of reproducibility, which is so important in science. So, yeah, this is one of those use cases that makes sense to deploy in that DevOps fashion.
Jay, if I could just follow up on that, can you give us a little bit of color of, why, you said, 80 to 90% of projects fail. Can you tell us a little bit more of how and why that's happening?
So typically, when you look at a data science project, someone has an idea, an objective, a challenge that they want to resolve. And the next step from that is determine, validate the use case with a stakeholder who understands the objective they want, but then you have to determine what data relates to that. Where is that data? Is it in Splunk? Do I have access to that data? And therefore, the stakeholder needs to be involved end to end throughout that. Furthermore, it's pretty easy on your laptop to go through and build a model in MATLAB or build a model in RStudio, but then to try to take that and put it in production is far more difficult. So without going into the depths of how Splunk looks at the architecture, I can say I produced a paper that's, or my team produced a paper that's out there and available, which is a Splunk validated architecture for AI and ML. And it really lays out all the tools we have. So one of the customer concerns always, back even 2 years ago, was, how do we build models and not impact our search heads? How do we not impact our vCPU or workload licensing? Because data scientists need to build models and continually fit and apply and move through the process. And that uses a physical thread on the server for every one of those sub-searches that are built into it. So what we've done is we've built containers, pre-built containers with pre-trained models in them that you can run off in a containerized environment. And we continue to update those. I think we have, Paul, we probably have about 45 of those containers so far. So we have things like BERT model, we have Roberta, we have access to Llama, we have RStudio. We have all of these integrations that if you understand the Jupyter Lab environment, you can open up a notebook and you can grab a sample of data from Splunk. You can take that out. It goes to the container. It runs some computational workload and then returns the delta to your dashboard without using so much resources on the search head and on your environment. So this is a kind of a huge innovation that's built into our data science, or what used to be called DLTK, which is now DSDL. And this is spelled out pretty good in the architecture.
Yep. But I think you hit, based on what you earlier said too, was it gets people excited again, right? There's a lot of people that program to program. Looking at data, playing with data, and developing these models that may break, may be a success, it gets them re-engaged with the whole programming mentality again of how we're using this information and making decisions off of it.
Certainly, certainly.
Just a fair warning, we've set aside about 10 minutes or so, 5 or 10 minutes for questions at the end. So if you have questions, start to think about them. What I do want to do now is dive into a little bit more deeply on AI's role in security. I know it's popped up a couple times, and I think whomever wants to jump in on this first can jump in. And question here, what are the plans and strategies for adopting AI for cybersecurity? Well, I guess we'll go to the public sector first because, Mark, you're sitting right next to me. For what have you, and it can be from a GAO perspective or more broadly speaking, as far as how are we thinking about the application of AI for cybersecurity?
Yeah, so this really comes into the entire government package. I mean, we know 14028 and 2209 exist out there, really strengthening the zero trust environment. As we're thinking about AI, we're really thinking about how we're controlling access to the information, because now not only are we combining various sources of data, developing models, decision makers, we really have to be cognizant of, get back to my earlier statement, is the data reliable, but how is the data getting into those platforms that we're keying in on decisions? If we're not trusting our environment from a cybersecurity risk perspective, then how are we trusting the data coming out? So the strengthening of the cybersecurity controls on a global concept with the entity-wide are really keys and paramount to the next step into the AI environment. And then, of course, thinking about it from who's got access to certain pieces of information. You think about human capital just as an example, and what happens if I misidentify an access control and someone that does not have that ability now all of a sudden can query vast amounts of human capital data across the board for an agency. We have information leakage across the board at a severe magnitude that we have to be really concerned with. So really understanding those cybersecurity controls strengthen actually the ability to deploy these, and again, getting back to AI experimentation, the challenges that we're all up against about how do we develop in a responsible fashion.
I heard you mention earlier when we were talking backstage about the cybersecurity as a body of knowledge looking like a large iceberg, and we have our known knowns, we have our unknown knowns, as Donald Rumsfeld gifted us with that phrase. And if we can take those known knowns, the ones at the top, those known use cases that occur across cybersecurity environments, and automate those, so then we can spend time, we can take those off the plate of our analysts and have those pre-built, whether they're delivered in the form of enterprise security content updates or pre-trained models, as we've done within DSDL, we can then take those off the plate of our analysts. So even at the university, we would get as many as 40,000 events a day. We would cut that down to 300 or so notables, but we had 10 people with 300 notables to go and investigate. So if we could take those off, then we could spend time thinking about novel threats and working on enablement.
I think that's a great point. If we just look at the volume of data that we're asking our cybersecurity analysts to review, it's grown really by multiples versus years ago. With the amount of sensors pouring data in, the sheer volume of what's out there, we're asking a significant amount. And so I think AI is a great tool to help, and it's more like a power tool, I think, that helps people do their jobs. And in this case, in the case of a SOC threat hunting team, if they're looking through, basically looking through a haystack to find a needle, and you have an AI tool to help find the needle faster, I think that's kind of a no-brainer then to be able to say, oh, well, we found this needle, and then you can have a human being on the trigger to remediate the asset and contain it. So looking at that stepped approach really helps to understand capabilities and flesh that out more, while thinking about some of the most pressing threats. And cybersecurity, I think, is fortunate with having a good amount of resources, highly technical, skilled analysts that can look at that, and with more data, they can look at more things. But the threat actors are using AI as well, and so it's not probably to keep up. It's really not going to be optional over the next several years. It's just to help people be efficient with their time and be able to meet the threat, given how much data is available now and the pressing needs we have in cybersecurity to be able to react quickly and deal with ambiguity. And it's just one more tool to help see through the fog of war dealing with that.
Yeah, and it's a good point. And one of the innovations that Splunk's been working on by putting assistance throughout the platform allows you to do that. A junior analyst can now click on a notable, and without understanding the statistical methods behind, say, Cook's distance, they can determine how an event occurred and whether it's worth looking at, and they get an explanation of why and how, and they can actually develop a more robust toolkit for dealing with these events.
Yeah. People have come up, workforce has come up, a few times in this discussion, and I kind of go back and forth, because on one hand, in the adoption of AI, it's like, well, is there a training barrier there? How do you get a bunch of people up to speed on the adoption of AI? But the flip side also is, at least in the case of security, that we're desperately short of people in the security space, and AI has the ability, or supposedly will have the ability to ease the burden on the workforce and ideally make it so those very, very special cases can be focused on by humans, where everything else is handled by AI. Where are we in this kind of continuum now of I guess the first question I would say is, Mark, do you sense that workforce is beginning to line up regarding the adoption of AI? or is that a real deficiency? And you could speak in broad terms or narrow terms.
Yeah, I think we're still at the infancy, because we're still, how do we integrate the products into really what matters? I think that's really where we're at right now. There are some places that I would probably say that are further along than others in understanding where AI is in whatever that product X, and now how do I use it? What are my procedures for dealing with this, and how do we train people? And I think a lot of this is really a mindset change. How can I trust AI so that now I can take those actionable events, whittle down to, maybe out of the 50,000 events down to the 10 that I really need to focus on, and then bring those up to light to actually deal with those as actionable items. I think the real challenge is right now, because we've had 2, 3, 4 years of AI marketing. Right now, it's how does it translate into actionable areas of these products that we trust.
Yeah, and I agree. I think in the near term, AI is drastically oversold, but probably over the longer term, it's undersold. So when we look at those governance models, really, AI literacy has to be a foundational component of that. So if you think back a decade or so, we were talking about training teams to deal with social engineering, right, and those types of threats. I would view AI in the same manner, that we really need to enable from the bottom up and the top down completely throughout, so everybody in the organization has some level of AI literacy. That has to be built into the governance frameworks.
Yeah. How fast is the future arriving with AI?
Well, I'll jump back to 2024 is a little bit.
We'll limit it to security. We won't cover the universe. How fast is the future arriving for security and AI?
Well, I'll touch back to 2024, okay. The last 6 months of AI in computer security. We've had the first fully generated phishing email generated, first fully generated malware, and we're just on the cusp of social engineering through AI, where people are taking voice prints and social engineering. So that's within the last month. So those 3 key areas make it very interesting going into 2025.
Yeah. So in that same vein, I work with a large energy organization that's collected tons of malware samples in the wild, but furthermore, every time an incident occurs, they ship out what could be called Splunk in a box. They collect a whole bunch of forensic data, and then they build active adversarial e-learning models to train those analysts to be kind of prepared for these emergent threats. And again, if we go back to the iceberg analogy and say if we can cleave off the known use cases and somehow use AI to automate those, that'll allow us to do more research in the realm of non-obvious relationship analysis, because that's where those threats are going to come from.
Okay. Peter, have a view?
We'll just ask AI. No, but no, I think it's going to come very quickly, and the other area is we may not know it as it's coming in place. Something that I observed that was really interesting is I was reviewing cyber threat intelligence vendors, and looking at one used AI, and it was a big thing to talk about, how are they using AI, and really it came out that that's been the industry model for 5 or 6 years. It's just people are paying attention to it now. And so I think once we start looking under the hood, a lot of things are just going to be AI that we probably think about, like the electricity or the water. And so that line will be blurred, and it may not be as clear-cut as we think it is. And, what's AI and what's not in the future as adoption speeds and things just seem normal, that start to work smoothly and effortlessly, hopefully.
Yeah. If you were to, each of you offer one piece of advice to public sector leaders, with you're obviously a public sector leader already, Mark, but if you were to offer advice to the audience as to how to advance the journey, what's the big nugget you would seek to pass on to keep in mind?
I would say understand it. It's here to stay. jumping back, 10 years ago, we had, big data, right? This is now the next evolution of this. We just need to get comfortability around it. These are tools. These are here to help us do whatever that function may be. So we really need to understand what are the underlying principles, how it's working for us in that global mindset. There's probably many tools that we use every day, let alone our smartphones. Anyone with a Android has got Gemini. Anyone with Apple Intelligence on the new phones. Those are some examples. We need to. As much as we may not want to embrace it, it's here. We need to embrace it. So let's understand it. We need to all understand it together.
Yeah, and I would, at a high level, I would say, start small to get small wins with clearly defined use cases. Apply that governance model to those use cases. Build cross-functional teams, because again, looking at cybersecurity and IT operations as two separate things is probably not a path to success if you don't have active and available good IT hygiene. You're probably going to have a bad security posture. And then I think you probably need to invest in it by building those governance boards and getting the right people. But it has to be completely across the environment. It can't just be in the realm of cybersecurity.
Yeah. Peter, what's your one nugget of advice?
I love Mark's take of understand it, and I think you take that understanding and build a roadmap or a program with phases and the smaller wins up front, and that just to get more people invested and the executive sponsorship needed for the program to be successful. That also helps where there should be a dedicated group nested that's interfacing with industry, interfacing with the other large government agencies that are looking at what are the newest opportunities or advancements in AI. And it's when I think, when Ford was saying that if customers, were asked what they wanted, it would have been faster horses. And so I think making that virtuous circle of talking to industry, talking to peer organizations, thinking about what's out there and what can I bring back, and then offering that menu of things to slot into the program will get people excited. And it's in the use cases, I think in the programs I've led, I had no idea some of the things were going to be used how they were, and they were much better than how I had planned. And it was just great to get the resources and the capabilities with the appropriate guardrails, have a program to support these things, and then get it out to the people that are on the ground and can actually use it. And they came up with things that I had no idea. It was pleasantly surprising seeing how effective new technology is in the hands of people that are just trying to get their jobs done.
Thank you. So do we have any questions out there? I see at least one hand over on the right and one in the middle. I don't know if we're using mics, but gentleman in the center.
So this is for Mark, just on the FedRAMP side of things, because there are some existing FedRAMP products that have AI capabilities built in that I guess have easier time getting through the authorization than a new product that's solely and only focused on AI. So I guess the parity between existing systems versus new ones when it comes to getting AI ATO'd on the marketplace.
It's a GSA question. But I think I'll extend that a little bit more into the development side of things, because what I would say my colleagues probably also see this too. Developers also want to work on various what is the latest application that they're working with AI. And it also, because of that, there's a lag in getting it into the marketplace. So if we're trying to think about how the best way to describe this, but if we're always shifting products, we're never getting too complete. And there's a lot of AI work that's happening in this space that's, okay, here's the latest model, here's the latest model, here's the latest model. And we're not saying, here's where we need to build our development from to get to the O&M model so that we can bring it to the marketplace. That's probably the best analogy that I can have. I mean, other than the standard FedRAMP process that everyone has to go through.
Any other? Okay, so a gentleman right here.
All right, so I'm new to AI, but my question is there a push to have Agile integrated into how AI models are being built? Because, vulnerability is always changing. If you have one model built, it can always change in terms of the effectiveness of it. So is there a push to have Agile integrated into how AI models are being leveraged? Because if you build a model today, in the future, it could be obsolete based upon the threats. And so I want to hear more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think change control is so if we look at aligning agile methodologies with AI deployments, there probably is some overlap there. And as I mentioned earlier, we've built a validated architecture around AI and ML, but following that is going to be a methodologies document that hopefully I'll get out in February. And in that document, I'm going to try to overlay some use cases with methodological processes to build through it, but definitely some of those components from agile methodology will be built into that in terms of change management, because you're exactly right. Many times as we would build these models and get them trained, they're going to require continual retraining to control for drift and to maintain accuracy. It's, again, with machine learning, when you build a model, it's not set it and forget it. It doesn't just work and then continue to work. The data grows organically and continues to change, and so do the use cases. So we continually have to retrain and keep an eye on models. So yeah, there's where it doesn't directly dovetail in, it definitely is aligned with those methodologies.
I've also seen in a governance program that methodology and the ability to update itself is another risk factor. So if it controls the parameters that it's using to train itself, or if it can really modify itself, you lead. There are more capabilities. It's absolutely more agile, more adaptive, but the window for potentially unforeseen consequences that could be negative also increases. And so I think it's an area that everyone is keeping a really close eye on to understand what's the best way to balance both agility from the model's perspective and risk.
Yeah, certainly. I was going to say, we've built that into DSDL as well, where we give you a containerized image that has a particular model in it, then you add your data to it to make it more robust and train it, and then you can put it on a training schedule where you continually retrain it, whether that's once a week or some off time to kind of keep it as robust as it originally was.
Yeah, I'm going to add just think about it from an overall governance side of things. You need to be agile in whatever that form of, if you're following safe agile methodology or whatnot, because you really have to gain that level of assurance, because AI is, whatever you put into the system on Monday may not be what Tuesday is, may not be what Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. There's all different outputs. And how is the organization really getting that assurance that whatever the information is in is complete and accurate as it's going through the systems? That's really where the governance side. So not only do we have an R&D component that really follows that safe agile, but now we have an O&M side of things that we need to look at it for the longevity of the product. And that consistent feedback is really going to be the key for really understanding. And I just spoke about that gaining that understanding from a management perspective, and what can we all do. I mean, that really speaks to volumes to, I think, exactly where you're going with your question.
One other question.
Hi. So given the sensitivity of kind of the cybersecurity domain, how do you consider factors like AI safety and alignment issues when applying AI to cybersecurity applications?
Who wants to jump first?
Yeah, so I think no matter what we're talking about with AI models, within your governance framework, you have to have some controls for ethics, but you also have to have something that Splunk implements as well, and we call human-in-the-loop feedback, right? So think reinforcement learning via human feedback. So I think in terms when people think, oh, we're gonna put a model out there, and it's going to remain robust, and we're not going to have to change it to adapt to the changing cybersecurity landscape would be a misnomer. So I think those components need to be foundational in your governance plan.
Yeah, I think the other thing too that we haven't talked about this is when we talk about stakeholders, really understanding this with your attorneys. A lot of people may not like attorneys, but attorneys really are your friends as they understand, especially when we're working with licenses in this environment. There's various products out there, and I won't go into naming specific ones, but if you're looking at maybe a web browser, for example, and that data goes into the public cloud, whereas if you're using it on the corporate side, you have a private cloud that you're working with. So knowing and really understanding this from an overall, again, getting back to governance, an overall governance side, now do we trust our cybersecurity side with components because of we understand our licensing requirements and how they've containerized our information with AI. So maybe it's in the cloud, maybe it's not, those type of things, maybe the models are local, but how do we understand those licensing requirements to ensure our data is our data? And if they are anonymizing data, what key pieces of information are we relying on, or are they relying on from our information that we're collecting? I think a lot of it really comes down to those key areas.
Yeah, and I mean, the question about alignment is something that we've been dealing with for, probably 2 decades now. So if you look at the mathematician that created weapons of math destruction, right? It goes through, I think it's Cathy O'Neill, goes through a handful of use cases where models were created or data science processes to meet a specific objective, and then we find out later that they failed to do so, and many times they do malevolent things. So alignment's it's an in-depth topic, but it does require that human-in-the-loop feedback to try to keep control of these elements.
Good. Well, I think we are at time.
We're down. I want to mess up whatever's next. We're good.
Nothing to add, Peter? Or
I just think if you have
get the final word.
No, I said that. No. I think that there are absolutely some sensitive actions. Containing assets, is something that's going to have a real world impact. You definitely want an extra layer of oversight on that, and a human loop, like you were saying, Jay. And I think that helps really everyone. And there's a difference between the pre-established rules and AI, where an AI is much more like a human being, where you would often have a human checking another human's work. And so especially in these earlier stages, it's great to have that review, and just making sure that leaders have a clear-eyed view of the risks, and leaders are still making decisions where it's at an executive level.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you to the audience. It was a very enjoyable experience, and for our panelists, thanks again.